Mr. Kishore Kharat, MD and CEO of Indian Bank, my colleague on the dais, Dr. Bhandari, distinguished members of the audience, ladies and gentlemen. Very good morning to all of you, and a warm welcome to this conference that we have arranged, with the theme being creating an inclusive and sustainable pension system in India. Now, when we talk about creating an inclusive pension system in the country, what we really mean is that we would like to extend pension cover in the country to all those who do not have it. This is the sum and substance of what we are trying to do. And if you look at the indices which are commonly used for measuring pension coverage in the country, one of the commonly used index is this, the percentage of the working age population in the country which is covered by any kind of pension scheme. India's performance there is quite poor. In fact, just about 16 or 17% of the working age population in the country is covered by any kind of a pension scheme. However, having said that, we also need to look into the reasons why it is so abysmally low. Now, it is very low because if you compare it with other countries, like the world average, I have some figures here which I got from some World Bank study. The world average is that about 40% of the working age population is covered by pension schemes. And the ratio is very, very high in the advanced countries. So if you look at Western Europe or North America, the coverage extends to as high as 85 to 90%. In Asia, it's lower. It's lower because many of the countries in Asia have the same characteristics as our economy. So in Asia, the coverage is about 30%. But even if you compare it with the Asian average of 30%, we are still pretty low. We're just about 17 or 18%. But like I said, we need to delve a little deeper if you have to really understand what the problem is all about. So a deeper analysis of the pension coverage would be, analyzing the coverage of the organized sector of employment in the country and the unorganized sector of employment in the country. In most countries of the world, you have the organized sector and the unorganized sector. Now, many of the advanced countries have a very small unorganized sector, representing just about 5 or 10% of the working age population. But in countries like India and in many other countries in Asia, the proportion of unorganized labor is extensively high. In India, it is as high as 85%. 85% of the working age population in the country is in the unorganized sector, just about 15% is in the organized sector. Now, Mr. Kharat expressed his surprise at the very poor coverage of pension in the country. This is the reason why it is so. And yeah. So, if you look at these two sectors, the organized sector and the unorganized sector, what is the organized sector? And by definition, organized sector is one where the labor operating in that sector is protected through legislation. So they have rights. So this labor in the organized sector is covered by laws such as the Payment of Gratuity Act, EPFO Act, ESIC Act, and all Factories Act, all kinds of acts. So this labor in the organized sector works under the ambit of these laws, and their rights are very well protected under these statutes. Unorganized sector is a whole shapeless mass of where there is absolutely no legislation available. Now, I'll go into the reasons why this is the case. Sorry, I'm not feeling too well today, so I'll be. But the reason, the characteristics of the unorganized sector is that it's, as the definition says, it's unorganized. They have very little bargaining power. Now, if you look at the MSME sector, for example, in this country, there are about 6 crore MSME companies in India, firms rather, not companies, firms and establishments, business establishments in the country. 95% of them employ a workforce of 5 persons or less. So these are really very tiny units, and they are not covered under many of the statutes. Like EPFO Act, for example, says that a business unit, in order to be covered, has to have 20 persons or more. So, and similarly, you have some other parameters for the other acts as well. So many of these units and business establishments operating in the unorganized sector do not get covered under any of these acts. And therefore, their bargaining power is very low. Income levels are much, much lower than in the organized sector. Another characteristic of this unorganized sector is that the employment is also sporadic. I mean, they don't have regular employment. It's very intermittent. And people have a job for, say, 5 months or 6 months in a year, and then they lose their job. It's a very migratory kind of workforce. People move around from one place to another in search of jobs. So, the unorganized sector has certain characteristics which are very, very different from those in the organized sector. And one of the most salient features of the unorganized sector is that because they are not covered by any statute or any legislation, there is no requirement on them to keep books of accounts, to keep records, to maintain payrolls, which is one of the reasons why a pension scheme has not been successfully promoted to the sector. Because at the end of the day, for pensions to work, there have to be contributions, and people working in these small establishments, if the contributions are deducted from their salary, it makes it much more easier. But when there is no payroll, when there are no books of accounts kept, nothing of that sort, this becomes well nigh impossible. So these are some of the reasons why the coverage of the unorganized sector, which represents the mass, the bulk of the working age population in the country, is largely uncovered. And now, I mentioned about the reasons for the historical reasons for the predominance in terms of the employment numbers of the unorganized sector. Now, we have a very large population, and it was in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. We had the Hindu rate of growth. The economy is plodding along at 3.5% and all. Population was growing. There were not enough jobs for everybody, but people had to eke out a living. So they could not get formal jobs. So they started doing work which was not within the formal space. More importantly, automation, and most of the jobs being created in the last 10 years or so are in the IT and the IT sector, where a different set of skills are required for getting a job. Now, a large mass of these people have very low skills. In fact, their employability is a matter of question. They cannot get absorbed in the formal system because they lack the skills, they lack the qualification, they lack the required training and experience to get into the formal sector. And then also, allied with these reasons, the fact that the traditional large employers in the country, the manufacturing industries like, say, jute, textiles, went through a period of serious decline in the 90s and about 10, 15 years ago, leading to a large number of job losses. So these people who were used to working, in these textile mills or jute mills and all, could not be productively engaged elsewhere. So these are some of the reasons why you have a large mass of people out there in the unorganized sector, which cannot easily be absorbed in the formal sector. And actually, initially after independence, it was thought that the unorganized sector would get absorbed with industrialization of the country. The unorganized sector would get absorbed in the organized sector, and the importance of the unorganized sector would gradually come down, as it has happened in some countries. But because of these factors that I mentioned, the very slow rate of growth in the first 20 or 30 years and the inability of industry to absorb all these people, we still have a large mass of people operating in the unorganized sector. And in fact, today, the formal sector, there is a symbiotic relationship today between the organized sector and the unorganized sector. A lot of the work in the organized sector is actually being done by units and small business establishments in the unorganized sector. So you'll find that these large companies, they do only the core activities themselves, and a lot of the other things are outsourced or parceled out to units in the unorganized sector. So it is a symbiotic kind of relationship which seems to have worked well. But well, the organized sector would definitely benefit from this kind of an arrangement. The fact still remains that those firms and establishments in the unorganized sector are very poorly off. The living conditions are terrible, wages are very low, they have practically very few rights, bargaining power is very low. So, well, this is a nice arrangement between the organized and the unorganized sector. There still has to be, and something still has to be done for the unorganized sector. And why do we have to wake up to the fact that something has to be done for the unorganized sector? First is the sheer size. Mr. Kharat mentioned some figure about 400 million people more than 400 million people in the unorganized sector. And today, we have about almost 120 million people over the age of 60 in this country, which is about almost about 10% of the population in the country. And this 60 plus age group is the fastest growing age group in the country. This number is expected to swell to about 180 million by 2030 and 300 million by 2050 if the demographic projections play out as computed. So, you'll have a large number of people reaching the age of, I don't know if you know this, every day 13,000 people touch the age of 60. Every day in the country, 13,000 people touch the age of 60 in this country. This is the pace of growth of this segment, And when you don't have any proper old age income security for these large numbers of people, entering old age, becoming old, then that's a problem which would have very serious ramifications. So something has to be done about this. And sheer size is one. Also, some of the other facts, like in the past we had this a support system in the country, the joint family system, which was an excellent support system. The parents, when they stopped working, would stay with the children, and the children would take care of them and all that. But all that started changing with gradual industrialization and urbanization. So families started becoming nuclear, and the dependence of the elderly on their children started declining. So elderly people are now increasingly having to fend for themselves in their old age because of the decline of the joint family system. Also, another factor which is complicating things. Complicating may not be the right word, because people are living longer, so it's a good thing. But when people live longer, they'll need more income in their old age, And when you are not well provided for in your old age, it will only augment your misery in your old age. So, these are some of the reasons why something needs to be urgently done about tackling this unorganized mass of workers there and providing them with some kind of a pension cover so that they don't come to grief and despair in their old age. And the consequences of already there are signs of the gravity of the seriousness of this problem. So, for example, in India, 42% of adults over the age of 60 have to keep working of which 70% of them is out of compulsion and not out of choice. They are not saved enough for themselves. So when they reach 60, 42% of the adults have to keep working. What is even more shocking, 22% of those over the age of 80 have to continue working because they have not provided for themselves, And this is not out of choice, largely out of compulsion. So our people are not able to sit back in their old age, and enjoy their retirement because they have not provided for themselves. In some states, 42% of people, adults over the age of 60 working is the national average. In some states, the percentage is higher than 50%. So more than 50% of those over the age of 60 have to keep working because they have not provided for themselves. And if you compare this with the position in other countries, I'll just give you some figures here. See, in India, this data is for elderly men because the ILO data was for men only. Between the ages of 65 to 69, 58% of men have to work. In Brazil, the percentage is 25. Just 25% of the people in this age group of 65 to 69 work. In Australia, it's about 31%. UK, it's 24%, and USA, 36%. In a 70-plus age group, 34% of men have to keep working in India. The comparative numbers for Australia are 7%, in UK it's 5%, USA 4%, and Brazil is about 25%. So in these countries, people sit back and enjoy their retirement and comfort, but in our case, this is not possible for a whole lot of people. And they have to keep working. This is clearly something which we cannot continue with for long. So there is a need for providing the unorganized sector workers with a pension scheme. And what kind of a pension scheme would they need? The kind of scheme that we have, the Atal Pension Yojana, low cost, giving good returns, regulated, simple to understand, transparent. Because all these people, if they are to put their hard-earned money, whatever little saving they have, into a pension scheme, they have to be assured that all these features exist in the pension in which they are putting in the money. So all this is there in the pension scheme that we provide. But the question is that enough? Now, Mr. Kharat mentioned about the fact that in Atal Pension Yojana we are just touching about 90 lakhs or so in 2.5 years of work. Clearly, this is not enough. And the reason is that this is a voluntary pension scheme. Now, earlier I had mentioned about the extensive pension coverage in other countries. In Asia, the pension coverage was 30%. But this 30% is largely on account of mandatory contributions. Likewise, in Western Europe and USA, contributions are mandatory in nature. Even in India, the small pension coverage of 17 or 18% that we have is largely on account of schemes like the EPFO scheme, which is a mandatory scheme, Coal Miners Provident Fund, and the defense, where actually it comes out of the budget. So these are mandatory schemes. So unless there is some element of mandation, it is very difficult to push voluntary pension scheme to this large mass of people working in the unorganized sector. It's a very difficult act. And we have been plodding along, like some of the numbers show 35, 36% growth, which in itself may look very large. But given the potential and given the size and scale of the problem, clearly a lot more needs to be done. So we have all been in favor of some kind of a, if not a mandation, probably some kind of a soft compulsion method. And here we've been talking about the auto enrollment scheme, which exists in some countries, most notably in the United Kingdom, where it has been rolled out with a lot of success. So the way it works is the government identifies certain segments of the economy which would be covered under an auto enrollment pension scheme, which means that all employees working in that those identified businesses and industries would get automatically covered under a pension scheme, a contributory pension scheme, unless they chose to opt out. So, the choice is given to the workers there. So, you will be automatically covered unless you decide not to join the scheme. So, this is something which needs to be tried out. But then the question that arises is that if this is such an unorganized bunch of mass of workers there, how will they ever participate in this? There have been two recent developments in the Indian economy which gives us hope that more extensive coverage of the working age population under some pension scheme is possible. The two developments are GST, rolling out of the GST. Now, what the GST has done is that a large number of businesses and establishments working in the informal sector or the unorganized sector are now becoming a part of the organized sector. Now, there are, I mentioned earlier that there are about 60 million small establishments in this country, out of which the estimate is that about 3.5 crores or 35 million are going to get covered under GST. Now, once you are registered under GST, you have to maintain books of accounts, you have to maintain records. And when you do that, it becomes a lot more easier to implement schemes like auto-enrollment. So this is a proposal we have sent to the government that, all these small units which have been registered under GST should be covered under some kind of an auto-enrollment scheme. This is something which holds out promise, especially given the fact that it's been rolled out quite successfully in countries like UK. Turkey is one of the latest one, and New Zealand also has been having this for a long time. So there is experience to back up the claim that it could be a successful thing. And the second development which I mentioned is this announcement in the last budget of this Ayushman program, the health insurance scheme. Now, what this will do is that when you extend health insurance to, say, 10 crore families in this country, it will give them some comfort that in the event of they're being unable to work for whatever reason, for health reasons, they will get this amount from the insurance company, and they will be covered under this insurance. And this till now was eating into their disposable income. Health costs today for the elderly in this country are 4 times the health expenditure that young adults have. The expenditure on health of the elderly in India is about 4 times the expenditure on health of young adults in this country. So when this major expenditure is taken care of through a scheme like this Ayushman health insurance scheme, then it does increase your disposable income, which in the absence of a scheme like this would have gone towards meeting your health expenses. So this is a scheme which also holds out a lot of promise. It will improve the disposable income of people, and thereby enable them to join schemes like pension schemes and try and ensure that they are well provided for in their old age. I'm quite sure that if these auto-enrollment and this Ayushman scheme play out as intended, then this spectre of a looming old age income crisis will gradually recede. Thank you very much.